Chapter 2. Name on the Board. I downloaded the books Teachers and Lessons in My America, and while I was at it, I also downloaded a copy of Sectology. After skimming Wikipedia and a few of the first articles that came up about Dvorkin, it became clear that Sectology was the work he considered his main creation, the product of years of deliberate effort, his ideal weapon for destroying innocent lives. To my surprise, I also discovered that the internet was full of material on the so-called anti-cult movement, or simply anti-cultism, with Dvorkin standing squarely at its center. Dozens of books, hundreds of articles. Researchers and commentators around the world were already debating and studying this subject. Plenty of material was available in English as well. Along the way, I also came across reports by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF, and a report submitted by the French NGO Cap Liberté de Conscience for an OSCE meeting on the denial of religious pluralism in Russia and the role of the Russian structures linked to FECRIS. Both reports contained criticism of Dvorkin and the organizations associated with him. I also liked a concise description of his activities I found on a US-based website. A group of independent journalists there had been exposing the anti-cult movement for years. They had gathered and analyzed a vast body of facts, documents, and historical events. An enormous amount of work had clearly gone into it. Still, I could see gaps, and I knew that my colleagues and I could fill them. But as a foundation, the information those journalists had compiled was solid, and it would be useful. It helped that the material on the site and the articles were all in English. I bookmarked all of it and a lot more besides, but then I went back to Dvorkin's autobiographies. Both books were in Russian, so I had to run them through a translator. Thanks to Mary, who used to jokingly call me a Pentium, I had managed even at 66 to ride the wave of the new era. When I retired, the first voice assistants were only just starting to appear. Google Assistant, Alexa. Then the race started. Neural networks, bots, and search engines all multiplied and evolved at a pace I could barely keep up with. Frankly, I had no desire to. I never liked any of it. I'm old school. I need information in front of me, written out by hand, printed on paper, sometimes even drawing the map of connections myself, lines, arrows, names inside circles, helped me understand a subject's psychology better than any data analysis chart ever could. But Mary always kept up with the times, maybe because she spent more time with the kids while they were in college, and had to stay aware of every new trend, including the technological ones. And after the kids grew up and started families of their own, Mary found ways to keep herself busy instead of slowing down. She mastered the mysterious art of social media. Mysterious, at least to me. Every day she added new recipes to her cooking blog, joined webinars, chatted with friends about what celebrities and politicians were posting. But she also kept a close eye on new technology, always exploring the latest neural networks. She tried to pull me into it too. Seeing the success some of my former colleagues had found, books, lectures, magazine interviews, consulting work for major television series, she believed that with my experience, I had never received the recognition I deserved, that the public should know my name. But I never needed that. If I hadn't been retired, I probably would have studied all those tools with genuine interest. Because the job demanded it. Because people's safety, and sometimes their lives depended on it. These days, social media pages, publications, and blogs are essential material when building a killer's profile. So little by little, I began turning to my wife for help. How does this thing work? Where do I click to do this? And if I need to, what should I use? She tried to hide her amusement, but I could tell how happy it made her. For the first time in many years, she was teaching me something she knew better than I did. So now, knowing how much material I would have to study and analyze in dozens of languages, I didn't feel the usual dread of how much time the basic initial processing alone would take. After a while, as I worked through Dvorkin's autobiographies, I began noticing certain patterns, those details that kept sending me back to Victor's manuscript. By the time I finished reading Teachers and Lessons in My America, my study was buried under stacks of printed pages from Victor's manuscript. Some were covered in my handwritten notes, others I had cut up again and pinned to my evidence board. But there were too many gaps. Online, I found several interviews in which he spoke about his childhood and youth, yet every one of them told the same story, and the same gaps kept appearing, holes I could clearly see, but had no idea how to fill. Several days spent from morning until night digging through the Russian internet brought no real breakthrough. I did uncover a lot of other information that would probably prove useful later, but at that moment, I sat in my office chair, irritated and restless, crumpling clean sheets of paper and tossing them at my evidence board, aiming straight at Dvorkin's photo in the center. Damn it, has there really been no trace left of that Petrushka story? I muttered, throwing another paper ball at the wall. The third day of my nonstop marathon of studying the subject was coming to an end. In our line of work, Clarity and a sober mind are a matter of survival and success, and I had always been used to success. This time, I didn't have to wait long. Then I caught a break. A book published in Paris in 1980. While digging through some archived articles about the hippie movement of the 1970s and 80s, I stumbled across a curious mention of Dvorkin. In Arkady Rovner's novel Kalilatsi, written from oral accounts about the Moscow system by one of its participants, A.L. Dvorkin. Well, I thought. That author's name sounds familiar. I was sure I had come across it somewhere not long ago, but no matter how hard I searched my memory, I couldn't place it. I went back through my notes and underlined passages again, hoping something would trigger it. Nothing. Then, by sheer luck, while flipping through Dvorkin's My America, once more my eyes landed on a sentence. That was how I met Arkady Grodner, a Moscow esotericist who had emigrated to New York several years before I did. Arkady Grodner. Arkady Rovner. Who would have thought Dvorkin would leave such a neat trail behind him and help me along the way? Right at the beginning of the book he had written, "All events in this book are real. Some names have been changed." I decided not to waste time and started looking for Rovner's book Kalilatsi. I assumed I had stumbled onto another autobiographical story I could devour quickly and mine for details. Instead, the light reading kept me busy for several days. To make sense of it, I ended up opening tabs with a dozen different translators and AI chat tools just to figure out what the author was actually trying to say. At times it read like a stream of schizophrenic rambling, or the drug-fueled haze of someone deep in a psychedelic trip. And yet something kept pulling me back to it. In the end, I was grateful that I'd trusted my instincts again. After all my years at the Bureau, none of us agents said it out loud, but everyone knew the same thing. Intuition was one of the most important tools we had. So here it was. Arkady Rovner's book Kalilatsi was based on oral accounts about the Moscow hippie system and one of its young participants, Alexander Leonidovich Dvorkin. To an ordinary reader, it might seem like nothing more than prose from the 1980s, but to a profiler, it was a priceless case history. Arkady Rovner himself appeared, judging by publicly available information, to be a rather contradictory figure. Described as a philosopher, poet, and publicist whose works had been published across 3 continents, he fit the classic profile of the intellectual émigré, leaving the Soviet Union in 1973, later teaching theology and religious studies at a New York university, and founding the journal Gnosis. In 1979 in New York, Rovner's path crossed with that of a young immigrant, Alexander Dvorkin. The psychological connection was obvious. Dvorkin, who would later become a crusader against cults, was at that time, by his own account, searching for a spiritual compass. In his memoir, My America, he refers to Rovner as something like a mentor, even calling him my former teacher, though he rather transparently disguises him under the pseudonym Arkady Grodner. Rovner's novel Kalilatsi is more than just prose. It is a snapshot of the psycho-emotional state of an era. It immerses the reader in the system of Soviet hippies in the 1960s and 70s, a world where intense spiritual searching intertwined with promiscuous sexual relationships and experimentation with drugs. It was precisely in that environment the psychological profile of Alexander Leonidovich Dvorkin was evidently formed. That was the profile I now had to analyze. You know, at Quantico they taught us one important thing. A criminal always leaves a trace, even when he believes himself to be a master of disguise. But this case was different. The subject didn't just leave traces. He dictated his own biography in the form of a novel. 30 years later, he confirmed it in his memoirs, merely rearranging the scenery. At the Academy, we have a term for that. An unconscious confession. If you want to catch a predator, you have to find the place where he first tasted blood. For Alexander Dvorkin, that place wasn't a university lecture hall or a church altar. His real hunting ground lay elsewhere. It was in the 9th grade on a construction site. Later, it stretched to the filthy back alleys of Moscow's hippie system of the 1970s. Rovner preserved it under the guise of surrealist prose.